Here we are, sitting with artist David Dornan. David has brought his exhibit, Detritus, to Jacob Spori Art Gallery, BYU-Idaho. Dave, explain why you titled your exhibit Detritus.
Well, it was an interesting word I ran across from a student about a year ago, and I said, what is that word? I'd never heard it. And it described my process accurately. That is, I find discarded objects, things that are thrown away, byproducts of activities, and I try to make my paintings about that.
Okay. Kind of like your signature paintings used jars with the painting drips on.
Yes.
Old used oil painting brushes and such.
Yeah, it's almost like the thing that's in the background that actually makes the painting is the painting, right, which I find it kind of intriguing.
So in this exhibit, we see a series of vessels and bowls paintings. They're not quite the detritus that we were just talking about. Tell us more about your vessels.
Well, the surfaces get built up and become detritus. I'll throw paint around until they start to build a pentimento, which is a history of the surface. Mm-hmm. But I've been fascinated by these group paintings of groups of vessels and moving them around. I think of we're all sort of vessels, and there are masculine and feminine and vessels. They line themselves up a little bit like everyone gets together for a family portrait, yeah, and stands up. Every once in a while one is tipped. I always would tell my students, I said, the next time you're ready to do a family portrait, get everybody lined up, get them in the hot sun, get them hold still now, okay, and then right before they're ready, they can't tolerate anymore, say, wait a minute, I'm out of battery. Then the moment everybody goes, ugh, take the shot, and then print that photo. It'll show people's true, like, oh.
That's a true photo family.
That was a true family of how photos. People react to that. So these vessels are containers that allow me to fantasize. So when I'm painting, usually what's going on in my head is not painting,
yeah,
but an inner drama. And that's why painting remains exciting for me.
Interesting. That was a new word for me as well.
Mm-hmm.
So you have this a great exhibit in our gallery. One will wonder, when was the first time you realized that you wanted to be an artist?
In high school, I took an art class as a senior. Mm-hmm. I always drew the pirate on the matchbook like everybody does.
Yeah.
And I took a class as a senior. My teacher did aspen trees in the winter with beautiful branches, and he gave me a sable brush, and he said, well, showed me how to do it. I went home and did it 6 times on a Saturday, and I was never really into sports, of course, but I was always attracted to cheerleaders, as every young man is, and I was out during art day. My teacher said, well, will you go out and demonstrate during art day? And a friend was throwing pots next to me, and I'm sitting there painting away on this aspen tree. And I hear this, oh, that's beautiful. And I look up, and there are 3 cheerleaders in their uniforms looking down at my painting. And I never got that recognition on the field, so I said, art is for me. And
discovery of talent.
Yeah, and I did find my cheerleader eventually. Yeah. I do
and
have
then you
my
were,
cheerleader.
Oh, wonderful. So Dave, I know you've taught at University of Utah for 17 years, but then you decide to resign of that position and paint full-time. Has that changed you as an artist?
Yeah, pretty dramatically. I still teach in a workshop environment in Helper, where I live, teaching people who want to be professional artists. I found the university system somewhat frustrating because I was teaching people art, which I took seriously as a profession. They were taking an art class to take the heat off of something like engineering. Oh. And once they got in my classes, I'm as much of a scientist as an engineer.
Yeah. So a lot of times you teach in classroom with the big numbers, and then there are all sort of different levels and abilities. Is that you decided you wanted to be an
Oh, okay.
full-time artists because of the university, the class setting, or is that because the kids come in, they're not quite ready to take art seriously?
Well, they're not into it full time, yeah. What it is I'm now, I think, teaching. I believe that I can teach people to paint and make it a lifetime, a profession. The general mantra is, well, I would have been an artist, but I needed to make a living. And I've seen many artists who go out and make very, very respectable and solid livings, which I feel like I have, and then live a life that they like. So now I'm teaching. Apprentices will come in and people who move to helper. And we have a nice community that has developed and a camaraderie. It's interesting to watch a student become a colleague. Yeah. And I have always taught through demonstration. And in the university system, there wasn't that much demonstration. There was a lot of words and theory.
Theoretical teachings.
But I learned by watching. And so that is my teaching, really, is to have someone watch me. And they cull from that experience very different things than checklists of what I should do to make a good painting or a good drawing. It's it's actual experience.
Right. Don't you think the good art comes from practicing, doing more, rather than read about it?
Well, I've always said that practice doesn't make perfect.
Okay.
Only perfect practice. Some people practice badly for years. And the question becomes, do you have 20 years experience painting or 1 year experience 20 times? They are different things. And
that's profound.
Well, thank you. But so as I painted in my own studio, I wanted to be surrounded by young minds, because I show them everything I do. I have no secrets. I'm not into one of these secret society things. I show it to them, and then I watch them unravel what I've shown them, and I see a mirror reproduced in front of me, and they take it apart and put it back together in ways I could never imagine. So all great art, I think, comes from a healthy, productive community where people are synonymous in a goal. And that's what's happened in Helper. Is I'm not going to come down and teach them performance art or conceptual field painting. I'm going to say, I like light, I like highlights, I like color, and I like detritus. And so in that environment, I can get very deep. I do a very simple thing really deep. I sometimes feel like I need to tell the students that do something that seems completely insignificant, but do it deeply and with passion, and people will beat a path to your doorway to get a hold of it, because that's what we're in search is art makes us feel the world. Don't
put bad practice over and over and over.
Right.
Yeah. I had a professor as an art student myself and practicing artist. Once I was told that if you paint 50 paintings, you might get one good one.
Yeah. Well, I'm a real believer. One of my favorite writers is Malcolm Gladwell, and I'm a real believer in the 10,000 hours. I had a teacher who was Alvin Gittins, who was a portrait painter, and part of his salary was to paint the portraits of different people around the around the University of Utah. And he had a specific way of doing things, and he taught. He said, "All I can teach you is what I know best." And I learned, I think, the most from him. It would be, he would walk up behind my drawing and he'd say, "David, come here for a second." And he said, you see, you've taken this young woman who looks perhaps a dancer and made her look like Cro-Magnon man. And take my chalk and walk up and put a few lines down, and all of a sudden,
it became she.
Wow, it was wonderful. Yeah, and the most difficult thing about art is objectivity. We're all subjective as individuals.
Sure.
We have our likes, our dislikes, but to see objectively is I think, the critical thing. And, looking through other eyes is the only way, we can see objectively.
Right, right. Wonderful. Thank you. You are a very successful artist with your workshops, and your paintings are collected by many collectors throughout the United States. What is your ultimate goal as an artist?
I think to keep my life interesting for myself. It's when I first started in painting, it was like, oh boy, I get to make a stretcher bar, oh boy. And after painting for some 40 years, I think there's a desperate need to keep reinventing myself. So being around, like, as I say, young minds and finding new materials. My prescription for myself is to go somewhere and find materials to work with that aren't at art supply stores. I'm as likely to get something at Home Depot to work with, and or buy a tool that does something and figure out how to make art out of it.
Right. Do you get bored by doing same things, or is that why you want to?
No, there are very minute differences that seem dramatic to me. History shows us that, Mondrian and Van Doesburg split up because they said lines should only be horizontal and vertical, and they were so much in competition, and then Van Doesburg put in a diagonal, and that broke their friendship. Now, what an insignificant thing to break a friendship, but that's what I speak of when I'm saying, gosh, it's amazing to me that I can take a pigment and paint it onto a canvas and somehow start to make it look like the three-dimensional world, and that's what fascinates me.
Yeah, that is fascinating. It's wonderful. Your exhibit looks wonderful.
Well, thank you. It's always wonderful to walk in and see a show. When I'm in my studio, stuff is piled on top of it. Things are hidden. I never see it cleaned up. And as people come into the exhibition, they're going to say, gosh, if I could paint like this, I'd paint all the time, too.
Yeah.
And they don't see the false starts and the anguish. And there's not as much anguish as there used to be, but I intentionally stick it in. One of my icons is Richard Diebenkorn, and it said, instead of shunning chaos, we should embrace it.
Yeah.
And I embrace chaos.
Wonderful. I can't wait to show your exhibit to our students and community members, and just very looking forward to people taking it in. A very rich, wonderful exhibit. So, what advice would you have for a young students that are just starting as an artist?
I would say do something very small every day. If it's 1 hour and the painting is this size, whether you sit down and get small brushes and paint a lima bean, that's enough for that day. The next day, paint a cube of Jell-O. The next day, put a piece of cherry, put a maraschino cherry in it and paint it. Collect a lot of small paintings because your mind will always be active. What I find in reality is students will say, okay, I've got a month off now for my vacation, or 2 weeks. I'm going to make this huge heroic painting, and that is very, very defeating at that point. That it's almost like, oh, I know why I didn't become an artist. So I would tell them, do a little something every day and collect things. Take walks, pick up things that remind you of the walk, and stick them in your windowsill.
Yeah.
Eventually, they will burn into your memory. The paintings are just your diary.
Right. So always create something, no matter how insignificant that may seem.
Absolutely. And the less significant it is, the better it's going to be, because the more it will be you.
And someday they can hope to be David Dornan.
Well, I hope so. I'm still, I give advice, and I still want to say, oh boy, maybe that's not true. So the great painters have always painted, as Van Gogh one time said, I go out in the field and I paint like exactly what I know I'm doing, and the next morning I get up and look at the paintings, and I become the critic. And so I don't know where I'm going. I know it's great fun and very exciting.
Well, obviously, a talent, hard work, and humility seems to be the combination of successful artists.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming to our campus, and thank you for your time.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to show. I'm excited to walk amongst the people and see what happens.